Welcome to the Healing for Male Survivors podcast. This is a podcast for male survivors of sexual abuse and assault, whether as a child or as an adult. Know that you are not alone and the abuse was not your fault. My name is Mike Chapman. I'm a certified recovery life coach and also a survivor. Let's find hope and healing together. Welcome to the Healing for Male Survivors podcast. I'm your host, Mike Chapman, and with me today we have a panel featuring two of my former guests, Michael Skinner and Rob Maniscalco. I will have links in the show notes to those previous episodes that they appeared on. If you're listening to this podcast, know that we're actually recording on video these days as well for many of the episodes. If you would like to watch the video instead of listening to the audio portion only, video version of this is available on the Spotify platform and also on YouTube. And today's topic is the overuse and misuse of prescription medications on CSA survivors. And as a preface, we found this wonderful article talking about this, and I'm going to read an excerpt from that as a way of introduction. And this is from the CPTSD, which is the Complex PTSD Foundation.org website. This article is from about a year ago, Misdiagnosed and Over-Medicated. And it says, throughout the blurry state of being continuously sedated, I wandered through the pale, cold halls of the hospitals, the bus rides to and from weekly case management and therapy appointments, still not cured of my ailments. From ages 14 through 19, I was continuously over-medicated as treatment providers were allowed very little time with me, often berating my inability to conform to complete sedation or relaxation with notes of stigmatization and crude humor. The medications were prescribed to me during this time, which I had noted down and can remember, were as follows: Prozac, Zoloft, Lamictal, Topamax, Zephyrus, Seroquel, Abilify, Zyprexa, Risperidol, Geodon, Restoril, Arozarem, Lunesta, Neurontin, Buspirone, Prazin, Trazodone, Wellbutrin, Cymbalta, Sonata, Effexor, and Lithium. When none of these medications worked to cure my relentless anxiety, depression, and fleeting states of mood disorientation, the psychiatrist recommended electroshock therapy for me at age 19. Luckily, another psychiatrist stepped in to review my case and finally noted that the ongoing trauma I had endured during my lifetime was the reason why the treatments were not working. As that psychiatrist has stated to me, medications cannot cure trauma. We understand now. With the current state of the mental health care system in the United States, practitioners continue to be ruled by third-party, for-profit insurance companies and the regulations they set for standards of care. Reckless and motivated by a push to save money, cutting costs often cost lives. This healthcare model of immediately diagnosing and pushing medications forces patients to not only lose hope in ever feeling better, but also creates a stigma that something must be fundamentally wrong with them for medications not to be working effectively. The pattern of this type of treatment establishes the attempt to seek out help and is re-traumatizing, stigmatizing, and dangerous for the patient. Whether it be an inpatient program, an outpatient program, therapist, psychiatrist, or case manager, all need to bill their hours to an insurance company. These insurance companies regulate what medications are prescribed and what treatment can be given based on the individual's insurance. The reasoning behind billing to insurance companies is to get reimbursement for their hours. This is how therapists, psychiatrists, and organizations get paid. And there's a lot more to that article, but that's a good introduction to that. So let me open it up to our guests. Let's see, we'll start with Michael. Let me know, Michael, what is your background in this and your own experience in this for medication, either of yourself or you know of other survivors who have been over-medicated?
Well, it initially was myself. This was back in 93. So
Okay.
January of 93, when the flashbacks just overwhelmed my life, the PTSD and the depression. And my ex-wife brought me to the counselors to get some help, and I didn't know what was going on. So I went on, I've never taken any drugs whatsoever. You know, I was in the music world all my life. I never did drugs, period. Now I was put on this cocktail of medication, psych meds. They basically made me a zombie. So when you were reading off that list from that thing, I could check off those and then others that weren't on that list. And again, I understand if people are having a hard time, I'm not anti-medication. I'm anti-overmedication. And as it was said in that article, as the psychiatrist said, it doesn't treat trauma. All they're doing, this is my personal belief, it was masking me. It was another way, it was chemically silencing me from telling my story. I needed to share what had happened to me as a child. It had finally bubbled up. I couldn't contain it anymore, and they were just shutting me down. Every time I would go to see it, I'd say I just had another dream, I had another flashback. That was just another reason to up the meds. And I remember my ex at the time, she was my best advocate. There was once a list she had of like 10 or 12 meds. And she said, you've taken away my husband and my children's father, because I was in a drug stupor. I remember my oldest daughter, she's 15. She's shaking me on the, Dad, come back. So I couldn't respond to her. So the tardive dyskinesia, I'm drooling, I'm twitching, all the
Right.
rest of it. The weight gain, I've always, I was thin as a musician. I easily gained 30 to 40 pounds very quickly. It lost the sexual libido. I was always very active sexually with my ex. We had a good life with that. The drowsiness, one of the biggest things was the suicidal ideation. I had 3 freaking suicide attempts on my life. When I finally stopped the meds, nothing. So I finally learned the drooling, the heart rate, and the nausea, the weight gain, the dry mouth. And I finally said no more. I had had another suicide attempt, and then the doctor, so I'm already still on several medications, and he said, well, let's try this. It was Wellbutrin, and it wasn't working. I go back 2 weeks, it says not working. Well, let's up the dose. Honest to God, from Concord, New Hampshire to my home in Manchester at the time, I'm in Goffstown now, it's only a half hour. By the time I got home, literally, all of a sudden I'm in pain. My stomach literally distended. It looked like I'd become pregnant. It just went out like that. I dropped to the knees in pain because it was just hurting so bad. I called the
Wow.
hospital. I said, what's going on? They said, Mr. Skinner, you're having a toxic reaction. We need to get you here. Well, I think I can drive. No, we're sending an ambulance for that. So long story short, I had to go into the hospital. They had to get all that stuff out of me, the toxicity. After that, I
Right.
said, this, no more. So I slowly weaned myself off. I knew I just couldn't cold turkey. And so you asked, do I know of other people? Yes. This helped fuel my advocacy that I've been doing now for well over 3 decades, because I have met dozens personally, and I know of hundreds and thousands, because I've not hundreds of thousands, but thousands of people, because I've been all over the
Right.
country. I've heard these same stories. People have emailed me. I've shared this stuff. I've shared the articles. So I'm not alone in this. It's wrong. Again, I'm not anti-medication, but we're dealing with trauma and abuse. To me, it's just one more way of society shutting us up. And now I'll be quiet.
Right. One thing I mentioned on the podcast before for the ACEs, Adverse Childhood Experiences, big study, I have links in the show notes, but it's basically a survey, a little questionnaire of the top 10 types of trauma, like family member in prison, divorce, and abuse as well, physical, sexual, and so forth. A list of basically the top 10 traumas that were most often found in that population that was studied, a group of suburban San Diego people this was with Kaiser and the Centers for Disease Control, and figured out of those top most common 10 types of negative experiences in childhood, how many did you experience? And based on that number, 0 to 10, they then were able to correlate all of these myriad of mental, physical, and social issues that the higher number of answers, the huge curve up in the numbers of percentages of suicide, of pregnancy or impregnate, drug use, smoking, suicide attempts, physical ailments like liver disease and so forth. All these things, and I'll have links in the show notes for all that. But there was a workshop a few years back, and someone said, I took the ACEs study and I got a 10. How can I lower the chance of having all these horrible things leading to early death? Is there anything I can do to counteract those ACEs? And didn't mention any kind of drugs to prescribe at all. He said the most effective way to lessen the effects of adverse childhood experiences is autobiographical journaling. Telling your story, however that is, whatever that looks like, telling your story gets it out, helps you heal. And like you said, Michael, that drugs do the opposite. They want to shut you up, close you down so you're shoving it down, not dealing with it. Another quote I've heard is chase your pain, you'll find your healing. So you have to pursue it. You can't just shove it down. You can't medicate it away to numb it. That's not healing. It's just putting a Band-Aid on a broken bone. You have to reset the bone, get it to heal properly so you can help the pain go away. Absolutely. Robert, let me hear your side of all of this.
Michael, nice to see you again. We were all at in the Oprah show back in the day in 2010.
Yes, both Robert and Michael were in the part of the Oprah 200, the episode where she invited 200 men who were survivors of abuse. And hope to eventually, that's my bucket list, is to interview the other 198. So if you have names and addresses, send them my way. So please continue, Robert.
Well, that's a very beautiful, thoughtful idea. But of course, we know that many of the people who were in that show have not survived. I don't know how many or what there is, but people with this issue tend to, either survive or not. And my story about medication began before my awakening. I'll call the Oprah show my awakening because it was, I didn't even know it was a thing, really, other than my thing. I didn't know other people had this thing.
Right.
And I was never encouraged to reach out to other people or anything until Darkness to Light suggested I go on Oprah. And they were people here in Charleston who are preventing. I have a great program to prevent sexual abuse. They train people who deal with children, etc., to better handle situations and whatnot. So I was in a bad marriage, and I was having symptoms of depression and anxiety. I went to many doctors, and I talked about my abuse, and we talked a little bit about the abuse, and basically talked about symptoms. And at some point, about 2005, went to a psychiatrist, and I said, this is a 15-minute interview with a psychiatrist. I said, yeah, I'm having anxiety and my mind is racing. I just want to slow it down. I think I might be bipolar. And he said, oh, okay. And he went, literally no questions, no further conversation. He just went to his cabinet and pulled out an antidepressant and an anti-anxiety.
Wow.
For bipolar. And, of course, as Michael was saying, I just immediately kind of went into I have to say I didn't go as far as Michael was describing into a stupor, but I was basically dulled to the point where I wasn't creating a problem in my marriage, and I had 2 small children, and I was sort of able to deal with the day-to-day bottles and diapers. I was at home taking care of these kids while she was out basically having an affair with her boss.
Wow.
So that marriage, obviously, it ended. It was as if she got me down here in South Carolina to be near her mother so she could dump me. The bad relationship came out of a belief in myself that I didn't really deserve someone of quality. I just took what I thought was a sure bet. So this gets into a little bit more of the background of it, but I just got into medicating, and it was until maybe a year or two after Oprah that I actually saw a psychologist who gave me a full day psychological testing to determine, or to get a baseline as to what was actually going on with me. And there was no indication at all that I had bipolar. I had anxiety and depression brought about as a result of trauma. And, until I really, really could deal with that trauma, and there's no medication in the world that can treat personality disorders, because I did spike a little bit in borderline and narcissistic personality disorders. These are what happens to people with trauma. They develop personality disorders. They don't necessarily go into mental illness. Mental illness is something that can be treated with medication, and it should be treated with medication. I believe that, but properly. But with a proper diagnosis, and with
Not
some
just, oh, you think you have that? Well, here you go.
they're
Here's the
just
meds.
throwing pills at people. That is not.
Well, check.
And that's
I can
what
get my break
psychiatrists.
early. I can go play
Yeah.
golf. Hey.
I mean, I really think that the psychiatrist, you were talking a little bit at the beginning, the psychiatry is like pharmacology. It's more of like they might as well be pharmacists. They just the latest pill, they get somebody who comes in and pays them some money to distribute this pill, and that's what they do. It's disgusting.
Right. Now, keep in mind, none of us are medical doctors. We are not licensed therapists at all. This is pure opinion. That's
one of my delusions.
So,
I'm sorry. One of my delusions is I'm a doctor.
All right, let me.
You just play one on TV, right?
Yeah, I played one on TV.
Let me follow up on the two of you, what you were saying. And yes, there is a subset of mental health challenges, conditions where medication does help. I agree with that. But this is something I learned as an advocate back in the early 90s. Over 90% of people receiving services at mental health centers, these are the studies. This is the studies you could look up, unless they've all been taken down by the new current administration. But what they show is over 90% of those folks receiving services have trauma and abuse in their life. And you peel it back, you're going to find a lot who've experienced what we have experienced, or childhood abuse in all its different forms, neglect. This is from John Briere. It's one of my favorite quotes. He's a psychologist. He teaches psychiatrists and psychologists out in California. He's well known, many books. If we could somehow end childhood abuse and neglect, the 800 pages of the DSM and the need for easier explanations such as the DSM-4 Made Easy, the Clinician's Guide to Diagnosis, would be shrunk to a pamphlet in 2 generations.
Yeah.
That's from the experts saying, so they're not addressing the trauma and the abuse in our lives. Because like you were talking about the ACEs, when I first saw that, I took the test. I had the 9. The only one I didn't have was my parents weren't in jail, though they were criminals. They should have been in jail. So yeah,
Right.
there's a multitude of things we can do to heal. Rob does art. I do music. Mike, you do your thing. But there's yoga, there's walking, there's exercises, eating right, all that stuff. Being in community, peer support, being around other people who get it.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
And, going on what you were talking about, Mike, about telling your story, which has been proven to be the one and only cure. I did, as I mentioned on our show, some exposure therapy where I was telling my story and staying in a very comfortable place while I did it to just teach my body to be okay with it as a story. And the more you tell the story, the less it suds it causes, the less anxiety, and the more you can, compartmentalize it and heal.
Right. Absolutely. I've got links to the first time I shared my story. You could hear it from back in 2020. Gosh.
Sure.
And
a lot of repetition, I'm sure.
Oh, yeah. So nervous. I was reading from a script and then they'd ask me questions. It's like, wait, that's way over here. That's 10 pages out. I still have 10 more pages I want to share. And I'm like flipping through. Wait, how do I do this? And then, but now it's like, yeah, you can throw anything at me. I'll just talk and I'll go on podcasts and see, okay, who's the audience? Oh, okay, little old ladies. Okay, well, we're going to tone it way down. And all right, we'll do that. I don't know how many older people listen to podcasts, but hey, we're not spring chickens ourselves. So, and we're out here producing. So. Say,
you talk about older people. I had an older friend of the family reach out to me and say, Rob, why are you talking about abuse on this painting behind me? It's called The Fantasy. I don't want to talk about the painting necessarily, but it's a old fantasy. It was something I used to help me to survive. It was a thing I used, and I thought I'd paint it finally after all these years. But he was telling me, why would you put in your description of this painting that you were sexually abused as a child? Nobody wants to know that. People want to buy your art. They don't want to see that. So you get a lot of censoring from usually, older people, but because they're so indoctrinated to just push it under the table. My father pushed my whole sexual assault case right under the table and just sort of pretended it just didn't happen and just make it go away. And this is how that generation really dealt with a lot of it. So I thought I'd throw that in there.
It was all secrets, and you couldn't tell your story, that it was all hidden for sure. So what do clinicians, hopefully we can spread the word, conferences and so forth, like this article clearly states, okay, yeah, this is bad. How can we educate survivors? What do they need to know to say so they can self-advocate and say, hey, can we not try medication? Can we try some of this other stuff? What would be the best ways for a survivor to advocate in the healthcare system that wants to just throw pills at and doesn't want to pay for therapy? What do you recommend?
Well, yeah, it is a plug, but I've been sending out the Surviving Spirit newsletter for a few decades now. I'm always sharing articles in there and website and resources of organizations and professionals, whether it's psychiatrists, psychologists, counselors, therapists, peers, addressing these very things. And they can talk more at length, and because they're doing it day in, day out. So there's that. One that would be really easy for folks to look up and Google would be Mad in America. And that's, and they have always cutting edge articles and the latest research and the rest of it. So they have all the credentials behind them. But the person who started, he's a journalist, and he's written books on this, and then there's all the articles. They can start there. And again, it's not so much to say don't take the meds, but look where if it's too much and if you want to wean off of. But they'll also be listing, between the three of us, we've shared some of the adverse side effects. I mean, but there's a whole multitude of them that we could go through. But that, the show, that's not what this sort of set the table. But I would start with Mad in America and start there, and then you can branch out. But you can Google and you'll find stuff, because I know for because May is Mental Health Awareness Month, I'm sharing some websites and resources and articles that are written by psychiatrists and psychologists addressing this very thing that we're talking about.
Right. You mentioned a good point as well on there. If you are currently on medication, don't stop cold turkey.
No.
You need to work with your provider and figure out the best schedule for weaning yourself off the medication. Because if you stop cold turkey, you can mess up your biochemical everything, and it was very unhealthy. So make sure that you work with your clinician to say, okay, we're going to wean off of this. How can we do that? And over weeks, you can go less and less and less and less, and they'll set up a schedule for you if that's your goal.
They will help you. Yeah. So if you are going to try to wean off, you wean off with some support.
Right. Exactly.
Because the answer is not for everyone to wean off. I think we've made that clear. Right. But
exactly.
I will say, if I were talking to a young person who was struggling with their mental health, and they were abused, and they're dealing with trauma, trying to deal with it, and they can't get to a therapist, because you mentioned that as like what if they can't afford therapy? If you go to a hospital, I'm not sure if this is true, and say, I need to check myself in, and you can go to an ER, literally, tell me if this is wrong, but you get somebody, I need psychological testing. Somehow or another, if that's the way you do it, or if there's some other way, if there's something available to you where you can get a full battery of psychological testing, because they spend a day with you and they can really figure out what's going on with you. And it wasn't rocket science. They take, you answer the thousands of questions, and you can't trick it, you can't play it, you can't fool it. And I have to say that after I did this first psychological testing with Dr. Teichner here, a psychologist in Charleston area, and we did talk therapy, and I wrote and wrote and wrote. I went through all those personality disorders and took all the attributes, people boss people around, think that people are paranoid, all those various things. How is that showing up in my life? What can I do to change that? What could I have done in this situation that, I felt like, and I went through this and I wrote volumes. The point was, I took a test. I took the same tests a couple of years after doing that talk therapy, at least in this case, knowing, I didn't try to, what do you call that, where you try to trick the test.
Right.
I didn't do anything. I just answered honestly, just like I did the first time. And I was no longer spiking in borderline or narcissistic personality disorder. I wasn't, I was mentally okay. So I didn't really need to be on all those medications. That's my experience.
Also,
Right.
look for trauma-informed counselors, therapists that are trauma practicing in your area.
Yes.
Maybe
Right.
start with the local domestic violence, sexual assault support center, because you don't have to have, obviously, the three of us, we've experienced, unfortunately, childhood sexual abuse, but emotional abuse is impacting your brain. It's doing the same damage to you. So
Right.
that's domestic violence, that's abuse. So get some help. I was fortunate. I felt I had won the lottery because I'm in Goffstown, New Hampshire, as I said, but I grew up in Massachusetts. I was born in Boston. After I left the mental health center, I was able to go to the trauma center, and Bessel van der Kolk was the medical director. So I won the lottery going there, and the woman I saw, the psychologist, she put me through the battery of tests like Mike was talking about, and then Robert was talking about. And so she comes back to me to do many things. She says, Michael, you're dealing with dissociation. I didn't want to hear that. But so as you were saying, Robert, we all have those little manifestations. I hate that title, borderline personality disorder, but it's trauma-based. Even Bessel van der Kolk and others, they were trying to change that label because it's stigmatizing, but it helps to look that up. And if you see all those little, and you say, oh, I have little elements of that, you can work to heal that. You're right, because I had those aspects, but I've done everything I can to not let that past cripple my life. So I had to address the dissociation. I did not want to deal with it, but it's helped me heal. So you may find someone, that counselor, that psychologist, that's going to bring some stuff that maybe you don't want to hear, but if you deal with it, you get through it, and there's healing. It doesn't happen overnight, as the three of us can attest to, but darn it, it's worth it. It's worth healing.
Absolutely. Now, you mentioned, Robert, not being able to afford therapy. There are so many resources. There's grants you can apply for. There's so many private NGOs, non-governmental organizations out there.
I always got therapy. Right. Yeah, you can always get. I always had therapy all throughout my adult life, once I figured out what's going on. Yeah, you can always find it. Schools
out there, yes. So don't give up. Look at, like Michael mentioned, domestic violence shelters, different organizations, victim support groups, all those things. There's ways you can find it. County, I know a lot of mental health that got privatized or decentralized. I know here in North Carolina that happened about 10, 20 years ago, where it was wonderful state-supported programs, and then it all got decentralized and privatized, and then it was a huge mess, and most of the people didn't get anything near what they needed. But there are resources out there, so don't give up. Keep looking, and you can find help. At least go for some therapy. If you can't find the trauma-informed therapy, get something, and that will help, and they might be able to guide you to find a better something. And
even just talking to a friend.
Yes, even talking to a friend. And there's lots of peer support, free groups, 12-step groups, Christian groups like Celebrate Recovery, different programs like that are out there that can give support that are peer-based and free, and pastoral counseling if you're involved in a church church or house of worship, there's those options as well. Though chances are they're not very trauma informed and they might not give you the best advice. I've had horrible advice from well-meaning clergy that, not worth the paper it's written on.
And
Yeah,
Mike,
maybe talk to somebody who's been through it.
and Mike, to follow up on what you were saying about getting help. Some of the different states, they have funding. So look at their Justice Department. I was able to go to the trauma center originally in Boston because I was able to they applied for a grant for me because my crimes took place against me as a child in Massachusetts. So the first few years I was going, there was a substantial amount of funds that paid for me to go to get that counseling. So that was through, I'm saying the justice, but it's through the legal, the state attorney general. So look at your respective state and see, because I'm just saying, I'm echoing what you said, Mike, that there is money there.
But that's a good thing. All my abuse was in Oregon and I live in North Carolina now, so I could pursue in Oregon State victims' rights, or if there's any child advocacy support program kind of things, that might be out there for me. And I recently, and there's even more stuff available if you were also trafficked. And I'm part of anti-trafficking efforts, so that's another thing. So figure out which boxes you check, and then look at all those different resources, whether it was incest, whether it was clergy, organized groups, family, all those things. And there's different kinds of organizations. It's like applying for scholarships for college. It's like, how many boxes? It's like, okay, well, we're part Jewish, so we can try that box, and we can, how many can you apply for? It's kind of the same thing, and you just have to do your research. Absolutely. Robert?
I just wanted to bring out that thing that Michael was talking about. I mentioned borderline personality, and he mentioned a stigma. And there is a stigma around these so-called personality disorders. And I think where that came from, if I'm not mistaken, again, I'm not a clinician, but the idea that personality disorders cannot be treated, right, by medication. When they say treated, that's what they're talking about. They're talking treatment means medication. Right. And there's no medication that can fix any personality disorders. Right. Or if you want to just break them down into that list of them
or manage them, but not heal them.
You can talk
trauma. Medication does
talk through them.
Trauma. Exactly.
Yeah, you talk through them. You can tell the story like I did. I told my story and I said, what could I have done differently? And I literally reprogrammed. They talk about Seneca and those people, they talk about mind control, right? And people get all, mind control. Guess what? The whole thing is about mind control. We need to figure out how to control our minds. And the way we do that is by thinking and working it through. There's no reason anyone that has is intelligent enough, over an IQ of 110 or whatever, 100, you should be able to figure out one step at a time, break it down. I mean, some people just, don't want to do that. And it's hard.
Something that also helps with that, Robert and Mike, is for the borderline, I don't like that label, but the dialectical behavioral therapy, DBT. So look that up. So you can find that online. You can look up stuff, find a peer support group. And Mike, what you were mentioning originally in the article, that's a great resource, the Complex Trauma website. They send out every Tuesday a newsletter. It's full of all kinds of great information. So that's a great resource. There's dozens of places for folks to get resources to help them find ways to heal. We're throwing a lot of stuff here, but there's a ton of things out there to help people.
Absolutely. Now, something we alluded on, and the article does too, is oftentimes survivors, victims are not only over-medicated, but they're also misdiagnosed, that they look at all these symptoms. Oh, you're bipolar, you're borderline personality, and so forth, where it's really, no, they're having a trauma response because of the trauma. And they don't even consider trauma as an aspect of the diagnosis. They just see symptom, 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 symptom. Is there significant trauma? That's not even asked. They just look at those symptoms. Oh, it must be this. But if you add the trauma aspect to it, oh no, that's PTSD or CPTSD. And so many get misdiagnosed. And that also results in the overmedication, because then they're treating a diagnosis that was wrong to begin with.
Right. Well, that's what my story was. I think that was Michael's story, too. We were misdiagnosed. most people are, and that's why there's all this medication out there being thrown at people. Because the people are just, this psychiatrist, I asked him after years of being on these medications, I said, how do you determine? And he says, I just have years of experience. I can tell immediately when someone walks in the door. I don't do his accent or anything, but they just know because they've had so much experience. They can just tell this is wrong. This kind of arrogance on the part of the psychiatry.
Sizing them up. Oh yeah, you need this drug. Okay, there you go. Yeah, that's ridiculous. No, they should be diagnosing, not guessing or assuming.
Yeah, psychiatrists don't diagnose. Psychologists diagnose. And they do make some effort. Mine did anyway. Made a lot of effort to. So you have to I wouldn't even bother going to a psychiatrist. Not that you could afford it.
And you do need medication, then it's the psychiatrist who will maintain the medication, see what's working and see what's not.
That's all they're there for.
Yep.
Yeah, bipolar is the most misdiagnosed illness, and it ends up for some decades later, it's the trauma in their lives. It's the trauma and the abuse, and because trauma, there's a whole bucket of things in that.
Right. One thing I've noticed as well is ADHD or ADD, attention deficit, is often misdiagnosed for trauma, because if you have trauma and you have hypervigilance, a whole huge chunk of your brain is going, okay, I need to keep myself safe. Where am I? Who's here? Who's not here? Is the teacher happy with me? Are they mad at me? Do I need to make them happy to stay alive? Where's the exit? What time is it? This huge chunk of your brain is going through all of that. And what are they talking about?
Yeah,
sorry, 3/4 of my brain was using all this stuff, all this energy, and yeah, I can't keep focused on what's going on because I'm trying to keep my butt alive.
Beautiful analysis, Mike. Wow.
Yeah, and it's so subconscious that you don't even know. I didn't even know until I started digging into this in 2019 that I had PTSD, I had hypervigilance, until I was able to get rid of it. And then all of a sudden, calm. It took me like 2 days to realize, wait, calm. I feel calm. This is new. I haven't felt this way before.
Okay, so what happened? What caused you to...
I went through, it was with a Celebrate Recovery, but also tied into my PTSD therapist. We did some stuff, cut ties with my father and so forth. So it was a mixture of things, but it got to a point where, yeah, I didn't have hypervigilance anymore. And...
Interesting. You mentioned... a bunch of stuff, but you said something in there about taking some kind of action, like cutting off ties with your father.
Yes.
These are also things
in my mind's space. Yeah, we actually enacted, okay, I felt like all this huge tether kind of thing between me and my father, and then took a big pair of gardening shears and chopped that thing off and went away, and it's all
gardening shears is a great metaphor, but there's an action that you took where you said, that's it.
Right.
I'm done with that,
Yeah.
Action of taking assessing what's in your life, what's working, what's not working, and really taking action.
Right.
If you're in an abusive relationship, or because you think you deserve it, you need to cut that relationship.
Right.
If your family...
I'm on the other side of the country from this guy, have had no contact or very, 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 very little contact in the last 20 years. But afraid that he's spying on me, he's going to get me. If I share my story, he's going to sue me. All these things going on in my head. I mean, but I know logically, okay, he's barely on Facebook. He's made like one post in the last decade. So not very tech savvy at all. So it's not like he's...
Who's stalking who?
Right. Well, yeah. I'm close to his family members and extended family who know more about what he's doing. So, but yeah, good point.
I'm sorry.
But yeah, there was like no logical sense to it, but it was still very much present. That fear was very much there, that he still had control. And yeah, being free from that just helped that hypervigilance go away. And yeah, that was huge because I had a hard time in school, like reading comprehension, because I'd read. And what is this? I did great with like anything with pictures on it. I did really well. because I could go, oh, their picture. Okay, now I'm on the next picture. Okay, and the words. And the next graphic novel's great. They were big in the 70s. But comic books, story books, anything like that. If it was just all text, I'm like, what? What? No, I just couldn't follow because so much was going on in my head. And I didn't understand why I couldn't understand. Now, looking back, I understand because all of that going on. Now, that's not to say you can't actually have true ADHD along with being a victim of abuse.
So
Separate things,
being a
oftentimes there's overlap for sure.
But when you're the victim of abuse and you're dealing with that, it's going to mimic a lot of, these psychological diagnoses. It's just going to. And just to tease all that out takes a lot of figuring. So I really encourage, as you said at the beginning of the show, to auto-write, to write down your story. When you're writing down your story, how does that show up in my life? Where is it showing up in my life? What am I doing that is destructive or unhealthy? What can I do differently? Writing, all that stuff.
Right, absolutely.
If you're not a writer, just write anyway. I don't care.
Yeah. One thing, hold on, Michael. When I actually got diagnosed as an adult with adult ADD, and they put me on the Ritalin-related meds, whatever it was, slow release. I forget what I was actually on, but because I really didn't have ADD and it was related to the trauma response, that was speed. And I was on speed for a couple months. And my wife loved it because I got so much done around the house. It's like, make sure you get that thing filled. And I was totally on speed. So looking back, and it did help me focus because I got lots done because I was on speed. So if you have true ADHD, it will slow you down, calm you down, allow you to focus. If you don't have ADD and take it, it's speed. And that's basically what it is. But it will, if you have true ADHD, it has a calming effect. Michael.
So when you brought up about the hypervigilance in the school thing, I'm right there with you because I can look back now, and I had a third grade teacher that was just so mean and cruel to me. What you just said, because you're looking all around, and she'd put me out in the hallway, send me to the principal's office, lock me in a closet. It was just, my mind was all over the place. Another thing that was brought up about, the shears, I love that analogy. So, and this is true for so many trauma survivors, that how we're connected to those that abuse, especially if it's our parents or those close to us that should have been close to us with love, but they didn't. A good book to be looking up, and the work he's done is, and others, but would be Dr. Patrick Kahn's on trauma bonding. A lot of survivors, they still stay connected to their abusers, and they wonder why, well, how come I can't heal? Because if you're still connected to those that were doing you that kind of harm, you're not going to heal.
Right. Absolutely. Absolutely. So, wind you down. Any final thoughts? Let's start with Robert.
Yeah. Talking about that hypervigilance. I mean, I totally relate that to your story, Mike, and to Michael's story as well. When I was a kid, I had that same kind of wanted to go here, wanted to do this. I was like always on the go. And, it worked out well because I put it all into, art and music and making something of my life, etc. And so there's some benefit, I guess, if you could say that, to channel some of that energy in a positive way, if you can find a way to do that's also a great idea. To help others, to reach out like we're doing today, is healthful. It's healthful and healing for me and for you guys, I'm sure. So if you find yourself in that situation, I'm talking to anyone who's listening, if you find yourself in that situation, there was a lot of advice in this program today. And another one I would just add is that, help others, help other people reach out to find someone who is hurting and listen to their story.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Michael?
What if I just say, I agree with Robert?
I agree with Michael.
That agrees too.
No.
Yes.
What Robert said is so true. And I'll take that a little bit for me. I did everything in my power, and I still read every day articles or little snippets on healing from trauma and abuse, mental health. I'm always going to be learning, because the good news is I'm in a better place. I'm happy. I smile. I write songs that are full of love. I still write about the advocates. I still address child abuse, trauma, mental health, stigma. but I also write about being in love or just wanting love or hope and all the rest of it. I'm smiling all the time. I'm humming music. I'm in a better place. I'm me, because we free the spirit that's trapped within. And down it, we deserve that. Obviously, Robert's a professional artist. I'm a professional musician. You don't have to be a professional to get joy out of these things. All the
Right.
things, follow your passions, follow your bliss. We've thrown a lot of stuff at you. Chip away at it. You're not going to do this in 2 weeks, but chip away at some of the stuff that's been shared here, because
Garden shears, don't chip.
you deserve.
That's right.
You deserve a life of thriving. We have survived.
God.
We're victims of
I'm
crimes.
sure.
We survived. We deserve to thrive. All right,
Yeah.
You got to put the
Yeah.
cheers on. That'll be
Yes.
the mantra.
Yes. Chop out all the bad with the garden shears. Yes, absolutely. So in closing, for survivors out there, advocate for yourself, find what you need. If you think you're being over medicated, talk to your clinicians, figure out, get better diagnosed. If you have trauma, make sure that they're considering that trauma in your diagnosis. And if you don't need to be on the medication, talk to your clinician about weaning yourself off and getting other things that will actually help you heal. Whether that's therapy, PTSD therapy, trauma-informed therapy, a therapist familiar with childhood trauma, all those things. And
Exposure
having
therapy.
toolbox, exposure
That was great.
therapy, all those things that can help you in positive ways, not just numbing you. So advocate for yourself, find the different groups out there, educate yourself, and know that there is hope and healing out there. You just have to search for it. Same thing, therapy. You can find it. You just have to search for it. Might take some effort, but help and healing is out there. And with that, we'll see you next time on the Healing for Male Survivors podcast.
Thank you.
Thank you, gentlemen.
If you would like to learn more about my coaching with Polar Live Consulting, where I provide one-on-one coaching and group coaching, both with a focus on healing for male survivors, reach out to me at polarliveconsulting.com. That is Polar spelled P-O-L-A-R. I would love to hear from you. I want to hear your story. If you would like your story featured on this podcast, contact me via my website. If you like this podcast, please rate and review, because that's how other people can find me, and I really want to spread this message of healing and hope to others. And remember, you are not alone. Healing is possible, and the abuse was not your fault. Let me repeat that. The abuse was not your fault. See you next time on the Healing for Male Survivors podcast.